Good evening, guys. Today we will talk about European Renaissance. So, I'm very excited for this class. We will cover, as per usual, the historical context first. Then in class, we'll cover the architectural context. And then I thought of structuring the lecture with the most important names and architects and artists because I think it makes a lot more sense, since we'll see it even later that the architect now is becoming a lot more recognized as an author and not just as someone who made those. And yeah, we'll see that. So the Renaissance, meaning rebirth, was a period of renewed interest in classical antiquity, spanning roughly from the 14th to the 17th century. As you can see here, and you can already imagine, our focus will be Italy. So in Italian, Renaissance, we'll call it Rinascimento, which actually means, as said before, a new birth. So it marked a departure from the medieval worldview, embracing humanism, individualism, and a discovery of ancient Greek and Roman ideas. This period laid the groundwork for modern Western view. So, originating in Italy, particularly Florence, Firenze, the Renaissance represented a profound transformation in art, culture, science, politics, and obviously architecture. The city-state of Florence, Firenze, Milano, Venice, Venezia, and Roma, all experienced a period of great power and influence during the Italian Renaissance, fueled by trade, banking, and political innovations. However, their dominance was ultimately challenged by the external forces and internal conflicts, leading to their decline and absorptions into larger political entities. Each major Italian city-state pursued its own imperial ambitions. Florence expanded in Tuscany. Milan dominated the north under the Visconti and Sforza families. Venice controlled key trade routes, and Rome rebuilt its authority after the papal schism. This competition created an arms race in art, architecture, and warfare. We have to remember that we came from a feudal society from the medieval Europe. So, in Europe, and in particular in Italy, you have to understand that the kings, had the same authority as the church, as the Pope. I sent you a link about a small and short video about how the papal and the Pope rose to power. I think it's a very quick to understand context video. So we have to understand that there is the king and the church at the same power, and then later on the church in Italy will prevail. The Pope will be the absolute power, and the king, for being authorized, must be accepted by the Pope. Then we have merchants and craftsmen and the nobles. So later we have lords, knights, and stuff, which will be staying more in a medieval context, and then we have freemen and serfs. As per said, the city-states became a lot more powerful. So, unlike centralized kingdoms in Northern Europe, Italy was fragmented into small and but powerful city-states as Florence, Venice, Milan, and Rome. These city-states were governed by wealthy elites, republics, or noble families, as they competed for prestige and influence. This environment of rivalry fostered the patronage of the arts and architecture as a display of power and intellectual leadership. We see it during the class that the patronage of arts will be very important for some local families, and a lot of people will commit in art, and a lot of artists rose for this particular reason. So one of these important families is the Medici family, which in Italian actually means a doctor, right? But it's not very linked to doctor job. So the Medici family, a banking dynasty from the 13th century. The first one, the patriarch, was from 1201, were among the first and most influential patrons of the Renaissance. Cosimo de' Medici and Lorenzo the Magnificent supported artists, architects, and philosophers, including Brunelleschi, Michelangelo, and Botticelli. The patronage system turned art and architecture into instruments of political power and cultural homogeny. Public commissions and grand civic buildings enhanced the family's prestige while shaping the city's identity. We can see here a scheme that represent the three branches of the Medici family. So I linked both the source and the thesis. This is a PhD thesis that the students did, and he underlined the three different branches. So as we can see, the minor branch was a failure, as it's written. Then there is the second, the Principate, and then the Grand Duchy. So I underlined the most important characters of this family. But we will not cover all, since it's a big piece of history. But we have to name at least three. So Cosimo de' Medici was the great patron of Brunelleschi, Donatello, Fra Angelico, and other architects and artists and intellectuals. So after there's Lorenzo de' Medici, or the Magnificent. He is the most important one, the most famous and recognized one, because he was like a cultural icon that, and I think we can link him as the peak of the De Medici family. So he was a skilled diplomat and poet. He wrote a lot of books, and he was a patron of Michelangelo, Botticelli, Leonardo da Vinci, and other philosophers. So the death of Lorenzo de' Medici marked the beginning of an irreparable decline. We can also cite Cosimo I, so Cosimo I, that came after Cosimo. That's it. So he was a Duke of Florence, so we are now in the third part of the Medici history. And then he became Grand Duke of Tuscany. He turned the Medici into a ruling dynasty, we can say. I have to mention him not only because of his politics, but because he built the Uffizi. We'll see it later. Maybe you already know what's that. It's a very big important museums in the heart of Florence that contains a lot of artworks. I went there 3 times and I couldn't stay we can say even awake and concentrated all the time because it's enormous, it's gigantic, and it contains a lot of art and art pieces. But one thing that we have to say that in the second part, in the Principate, there are two the Medici members that became Pope, right? So you can imagine how entangled the Medici family was with politics and religion, and how religion was important to rule. So don't forget that the Medici family started as a banking family. So the wealth that financed the Renaissance was built on Florentine banking, so like the Medici Bank, Venetian maritime trade, and rising consumer culture. However, this prosperity was not evenly distributed. Urban poor and rural populations remained defranchised. So what does it mean? It means that the wealth remained to the upper class, and the urban and rural populations, the freemen from the past image that I showed you, the medieval one, were at the same place as serfs, while artisans and guild members faced growing pressure, economic pressure. So the rich became richer and the poor became poorer. Class tension occasionally led to uprisings like the Ciompi Revolt in 1378, when wool workers in Florence briefly seized the power, but were too much sooner deposed. We can say that the Renaissance was a mix between conflict and transformations. While the Italian Renaissance is often remembered for its cultural brilliance, it unfolded in a context of profound political instability, violent conflict, and economic transformation. Between the 14th and the 16th century, Italy was a patchwork of rival city-states, constantly at war or engaged in diplomatic intrigue. The wealth that funded art and architecture came from trade, banking, taxation, and often exploitation. Right? Remember this claim. So by the 14th century, Italy had largely transitioned from feudalism to urban capitalism. Cities like Florence, Venice, Genoa became commercial hubs connected to the Mediterranean and now Northern Europe trade routes. Wealth was increasingly generated by banking, commerce, and industry rather than land ownership. We can see here in the image not an Italian landscape, but France revolts that abolished the feudal system. The same happened at different times in Italy. As per said, Italy was not the Italy you have to think about today. It was a lot more fragmented. It was a lot of different and small political hubs, city-states as per se. So returning to the urban economies, we can see here a Rome and then an hypothetical, beautiful, ideal urban landscape. We'll see it later. All this banking, commerce, and industry created a powerful merchant class, like the Medici, who would reshape politics and culture. Now we'll start by quoting different events that happened during the different periods of the Renaissance. We have to start by the Black Death and the social consequences. So, this Black Death, which was an epidemic, devastated Europe, killing nearly half, right, half of Italy's population. The demographic collapse led to labor shortages, economic reconstructuring, and increased social mobility. Workers could demand higher wages because they were less, and guilds gained political influence. This also prompted to a wave of religious anxiety and reflection, contributing to both spiritual reform and the humanist movement that followed. So, as you can imagine, as death was something that people touched with hand all days, they could only rely on religion. So, the role of the Catholic Church rose. It remained a dominant power and a central patron of Renaissance art and architecture. Italian Renaissance was deeply shaped by religious turmoil. Events like the Avignon Papacy and the Great Schism weakened the church authority, while rising humanist thinking encouraged more secular and individual approaches to faith. Conflicts between the papacy and the city-states, such as the War of the Eight Saints, reflecting growing civic resistance to religious control. Meanwhile, the Grand Church projects like St. Peter's Basilica and the sale of indulgences sparked criticism, eventually leading to Martin Luther's Reformation in 1517. Radical figures like Savonarola briefly seized religious power but were suppressed. The period ended with the sack of Rome, 1527, marking a collapse of papal prestige and setting the stage for the Counter-Reformation. So, I linked here all the different most important events. We will not cover it all because it's a lot, but we'll try to include the most important ones. We'll start by saying the Great Schism. As you can imagine, a lot of religious ideas arose, but not all were centering their core values on the same things. So at one point, there were two popes, and there was these great schisms that broke the church into two main parts. We are talking about Italy's church, so we're talking about Catholic Christianism. We can see here the Western schism that divided Europe, and as Per said, religion and power, political power, were linked. So not only this was a religious fracture, but this was also a political one. And I have to urge you to see at Italy. It's not the Italy we know today, but still, the north is alleged to Rome, while the south is alleged to Avignon. Avignon is a city of France. So all of this undermined the church authority and catalyzed calls for reforms. we'll see the most important one later. So talking about reforms and conflicts, the conflicts between Florence and the papacy revealed tensions between local republican governments and centralized church authority. Florence's defiance of Pope Gregory XI, refusing to pay taxes and demanding more civic autonomy, was part of a broader struggle across Italy between communal republicanism and monarchical or papal dominance. These battles shaped both politics and the role of arts as political propaganda. One of the most dramatic events in the Renaissance politics is the Pazzi conspiracy that involved the attempted assassination of Lorenzo de' Medici during Mass. So, we are now in Florence. We are under the patronage of the Medici family. But not all the civilians are agreeing upon the Lorenzo de' Medici politics. As I said before, the upper class, like the merchant class of the Lorenzo de' Medici family, and the lower class were brutally separated. Backed by rival families and even Pope Sixtus IV, the plot failed. The Pazzi conspiracy attempted to murder Lorenzo de' Medici, and of course, rival families wanted he gone. And Pope Sixtus IV obviously wanted him gone too, because, as I said before, two later members of the de' Medici family became popes. But fortunately or unfortunately, you are free to think about it however you want. The plot failed, and the Medici brutally retaliated. This event underscored the volatile mix of religion, politics, and finance in Renaissance Italy and solidified Lorenzo's grips on power. Now, we'll talk about this, and it's a very important one. Starting with Charles VIII's invasion of Italy in 1494, the peninsula became a battleground for France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire, and, of course, the papacy. These conflicts, known as the Italian War, devastated cities and disrupted trade. While they marked the decline of independent Italian power, they also spread Renaissance culture across Europe. We can see here the flag of the 16th century of France on the left, and then the flag of the Papal State on the right, which is the same one as today. These conflicts peaked in the sack of Rome in 1527 by the imperial troops, symbolized the end of the High Renaissance. We can see here. The image you can see here is the papal guards that guarded the state of the Pope. And if you're wondering, yes, they still wear this clothing, this particular clothing. I urge you to go watch the change of the guard on YouTube, on internet. It's fantastic. We're still in Florence. We're talking about Girolamo Savonarola, a Dominican friar, led to a theocratic regime and denounced secular art, luxury, and Medici's rule. He organized the Bonfire of Vanities, in which books, paintings, and luxurious goods were publicly burned. Though short-lived, his movement reflected growing tensions between Christian morality and Renaissance humanism, foreshadowing their reformations. As you can imagine, Savonarola was executed. How? He was burned. Eh, this happened a lot in Italy. Italians like to burn people, apparently. This is the most important religious reform that I tell you today. So the Protestant Reformation began in 1517 with Martin Luther King 95 Theses, marked a turning point in European religious history. Thought centered in Europe, in Germany, its roots lay in a broader Renaissance criticism of the Catholic Church, including concerns about corruption, the sale of indulgences, and the growing disconnect between religious authority and personal faith. Renaissance humanism had encountered individuals to return to the original sources of the scriptures and to question institutional power, creating a fertile ground for reforms ideas to take hold. We can see here Wittenberg, which is the city where Martin Luther put the 95 Theses. So, after, in response, the Catholic Church launched the Counter-Reformation, a series of internal reforms aimed to reaffirming doctrine, curbing abuses, and revitalizing religious life. So you have to imagine that the church in those years were like a feast. It was amazing, it was rich, it was precious, it was gold, it was satin, it was velvet, it was expensive. While people almost couldn't afford the bread, right? In Europe, the bread is like the rice in Asia. And the fact that the Pope was manifesting this extreme lifestyle, and it was linked to religious beliefs and faith, and had nothing to do with actual faith. This was the problem, because he also to maintain his extremely rich and expensive lifestyle, he sold indulgences. What were these indulgences? So apparently these indulgences were nothing concrete. People paid just to be said that all their sins were they were not there anymore, right? So they paid these so-called indulgences as to pay respect to God and to wash away their sins. But the Reformations and the Counter-Reformation together marked the end of the unified Christian world in the West, reshaping the religious, political, and cultural landscape of Europe. So the Italian Renaissance thrived not despite the conflicts, but in many ways because of it. Wars, revolts, and economic upheaval created a new power structure, and patrons were eager to legitimize their rule through culture. Political instability made architecture and art tools of control, memory, and ambition. Humanism, the philosophical backbone of the Renaissance, emphasized the study of classical text, human potential, and rational thought. In Greek architecture, this meant a return to the forms, symmetry, and proportion of Greek and Roman antiquity, which I have to say to you guys. See this white marble sculpture? When Renaissance rediscovered it, it was white. But in ancient time, in ancient Greek and in ancient Roman Italy, they were painted. They were painted over. So you have to imagine these marble structures painted over. I think it was very kitsch. Do you remember the Etruscan temples? They had small sculptures of peoples, of gods, up in their roof. You could see them outside the temple, right? They were painted. You now have to imagine this white one painted. Anyway, returning to humanism, architects like Leon Battista Alberti wrote treatises reviving Vitruvian principles, arguing that architecture was both of a science and an art rooted in harmony, mathematics, and human dignity. We are now finished the historian context, and I put here small and short documentaries that are meant to, how we can say, to give you a much clearer idea of what happened in Renaissance Europe. Good, guys. So I'm very happy, and tomorrow we'll see the Renaissance architecture. Yeah, we'll see tomorrow how it goes. I'm very excited. So see you all tomorrow. Bye bye.